Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Adri, and today I'm here to bring you my Queer Lit Readathon wrap-up. Again, in case you don't know, the Queer Lit Readathon is a week of reading nothing but queer lit. For this last round, I read a lot of amazing things, completed a few challenges, and I did change up my TBR a little bit towards the end, but all in all, it was a really great week. So the first thing I read was A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. This is Billy Ray's memoir. He is a queer Indigenous person belonging to the Driftpile First Nation in Canada, and this memoir is all about his experiences existing at the intersection of queerness, joy, grief, love, and loss. Content warnings for references to homophobic slurs, graphic depictions of sex, sexual language, discussions of suicide and suicide ideation, discussion of AIDS, racism, and references to serial killings and mass shootings. This memoir is short but so incredibly powerful. Billy Ray Belcourt is a poet first and foremost, and that really comes through in the way he writes. There are some people who just possess such a mastery of language that it doesn't matter what they write, whether it's a book, a grocery list, an Instagram caption, or a 240-character tweet. It is just so abundantly clear that they are poets. People like Chen Chen, Ocean Vuong, Benjamin Elera Sainz, there's just such an intention and thoughtfulness of language in how they carry themselves, and I definitely also feel that with Billy Ray Belcourt. He blends objective and subjective language in a way I've never seen before. It's like a blend of academia and theory with highly emotive imagery and metaphor, and the combination of those differing elements breaks open language and understanding in a totally new way. And I feel this memoir really balances a celebration of queer Indigenous joy with acknowledging queer Indigenous grief as well, and how both are valid experiences within Indigenous queerness. Billy Ray talks about queer joy as resistance, about naming and recognizing queer joy as being a part of resistance, which I think is absolutely true. We are not defined by our pain, but in the ways we find joy in a world that often doesn't want us to exist. And that is exacerbated even further in his experience as a queer Indigenous person, when crimes against Indigenous peoples often go ignored, when Indigenous peoples are seen as something to conquer or completely erase. He talks about feeling like he was born into the past because so many people think that Indigenous peoples are frozen in history and time, while also constantly chasing the present tense and also needing to be present in his own experiences. As I mentioned in the content warnings, he's also extremely frank about Indigenous grief, especially the way genocide, mass killings, and disproportionate suicide rates have plagued his community specifically, and how ensuring Indigenous futurity is incredibly necessary work. It's not just about safety, it's not just about resources and support, it's not just about visibility and awareness, it's not just about suicide prevention, it's about imagining and creating a world where Indigenous people are invited to exist in a way they never have been. This memoir truly touches on so many things, from dating apps to sex to Billy Ray's experiences in academia to the shooting of Colton Bushi, and beautifully shows how all of those deeply felt disparate parts piece together the author's experience. Danny from Thunderbird Woman Reads has a great review of this book, which I will link down below because I'm sure I haven't done it a smidgen of justice, but this was fantastic. I will definitely be reading Billy Ray's poetry, and I gave it 5 stars. After that, I picked up One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This comes out on May 6th from Wednesday Books, I believe. It's an Own Voices sapphic contemporary sci-fi story about August, who is very much a struggling millennial trying to make her way in New York City, and as she's floundering her way through new roommates and working at a diner, she falls in love with a stranger on the subway, as one does. This mysterious, attractive girl is always on the same commute, always wearing the same thing, and August realizes that her subway crush may in fact be displaced from the 1970s. Content warnings for graphic descriptions of sex, some instances of homophobia and racism, family estrangement, and allusions to grief and familial loss. This is such a worthy successor to Red, White, and Royal Blue. It is a completely different kind of rom-com, but it is still full of so much humor and light and heart. This book is effervescent and joyous. It is truly a millennial love story that really understands the innate loneliness and placelessness that so many young adults feel in this current time. It really speaks to how many of us feel like we don't belong anywhere, like we're not good at anything, like the futures we were told to work for are no longer within our reach. August is definitely in that place where she feels like she's drifting. She doesn't know what she's working towards. She's trying to prove to herself that she can live on her own and make friends and be a real adult, whatever that is, but she still feels like she's faking her own existence. And that feeling of drifting is beautifully paralleled with what's happening to Jane, the mysterious and devastatingly charming girl on the subway who is caught between worlds in a very literal sense. She's stuck on the queue and forced to ride this same commute every single day, so that really echoes the way August feels like she's just going through the motions of everyday life and never making any progress. I think their relationship is really wonderful, not only because they're both perfectly suited to help the other person, but because I think they're two lonely people who stop and recognize each other in their loneliness. It's the kind of relationship where the more the characters get to know each other, the more they give each other, the more real they become, not only to the outside world, but to themselves. Theirs is the kind of love that makes you recognize yourself and brings the world around you into even sharper focus. And I think that definitely goes for the friend group August is building as well. They're all eccentric and joyous and unapologetically themselves, which opens up August's world and allows her to grow and be vulnerable and authentic. I've talked a lot here about the emotion of the story because that depth really blew me away, and that's how the story hit me the most personally, but I also want to emphasize that just like Red, White, and Royal Blue, this book is definitely such a bright light and absolutely hilarious. It is a love letter to New York, to drag shows, to friendship, to food, to queerness, to self-discovery, and to impossibly possible magic. There's a really great driving force of mystery and historical parallels that kept me invested in the story. There's kissing for the sake of science, there's an absurd amount of delicious food, and as I said, tremendous amounts of joy. This was just fantastic, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Even though I like Inhale Red One Last Stop, it was still pretty far in the week at that point, and I knew I would not finish another full-length novel, so I decided to dip into some shorter works instead, starting with Alok Vaid Menon's poetry collection, Femme in Public. So Alok is an incredible writer, poet, performance artist, fashion designer, and activist. They are Indian American, queer, non-binary, and gender non-conforming, and these poems very much challenge the binary and reflect on what it means to be visibly non-binary in a world where different is still very much seen as being dangerous. Content warnings for sexual references, allusions to harassment, homophobia, and transphobia, and brief mentions of assault and injury relating to assault. First of all, credit where credit is due. I gotta give a shout out to the incredible Beck from Mooney Reads by Starlight, who is the first and only person I've ever seen to recommend Femme in Public, and they are the one who brought it to my attention. Their channel is incredible. I will have it linked down below, and you should definitely check them out. I love Alok so much, and I knew I would enjoy their poetry, and I definitely did. It is just as much about gender euphoria and gender affirmation as it is about the interrogation of ciscentrism and toxic binary mindsets. It's very much about the loudness of the world and how so many trans folks and gender non-conforming folks transgress the comfortable confines of existence, how we are met by hatred, aggression, and at worst, violence in a world where self-erasure is glorified as a path to safety and acceptance. It's about those of us who have no interest in passing, about what happens when you understand your beauty and your power as being your own, and about how the currency of toxic masculinity is built on hurting others and perpetuating a ritual of loneliness. It's a collection that's very much about healing and learning to exist for yourself while also holding space to acknowledge the ways we are hurting and grieving our learned inability to be ourselves and recognize ourselves. It was just a tremendous collection from start to finish, and I gave it 5 stars. And the last thing I picked up was a novella, and that was my arc of Fireheart Tiger by Aliette de Bodard. This novella comes out on February 9th from Tor.com. I believe it's an Own Voices Vietnamese-inspired fantasy story about Princess Tan, who was sent away to the enemy kingdom of Efteria as a child and has now returned to her mother's imperial court. When she was in Efteria, the palace was destroyed in a horrible fire which now haunts Tan's every waking moment, and as a diplomat in her mother's court, she is put right back in the path of her forbidden first love, the Efterian princess, Eldris. Content warnings for toxic parental relationships, some non-graphic descriptions of sex, allusions to manipulation, abuse, and possible grooming, as well as trauma relating to fires. This does everything a good fantasy novella should. It hooks you, it presents you with this evocative and enticing fantasy world, and it gives you so much to contemplate in such a condensed space. I requested this because it was pitched as The Goblin Emperor meets Howl's Moving Castle, and while it's definitely not a one-to-one retelling of either one of those, I think it takes elements from both, like Exiled Royalty, Sentient Fire, Unspeakable Bargains, and uses them in really interesting ways. The bulk of this story is court politics, political maneuvering, illicit romance, and magic, and I found there to be a good balance of all of those things, but I think it's also about understanding power and power imbalance, especially for Tan, who is surrounded by powerful people who want to take advantage of her weakness. It's not even really weakness, but rather what they perceive to be her weakness. They mistake her quiet, thoughtful, considering nature as being weak, as being conquerable, but she is continuing to grow the more she questions who she is and what she wants. She has a lot of toxic relationships in her life, from her overbearing and abusive mother to her first love, who literally rules the country trying to overtake Tan's homeland. And I feel like the story is also about learning to recognize love when all your life you have been denied love and safety and comfort. In the beginning, she thinks that successfully navigating the court and winning victories for her mother is love. She thinks being wanted by someone as dangerous and powerful as Eldris is love, but those relationships are predicated on Thawne herself being helpless and powerless. So her journey to me is about turning destruction into hope and fighting for her own happiness. It's a story about the delicate relationship between pain and joy, hurt and healing, and how to live in an unkind world while fighting for kindness. The only problem was that I enjoyed it so much and I became so invested in the backstory and the world building that I couldn't help but imagine this as an entire book of its own, and I think there definitely was enough content for that to happen, but this was still a really great novella and I gave it 4.5 stars. So those are the 4 things I read for this past round of the Queer Lit Readathon. If you also took part, let me know in the comments below what was your favorite thing that you read, or what do you plan to read next. But that's everything I had for this wrap up today. Until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.